How old is he? The question hung in the air of the dimly lit kitchen, each word weighted with a decade of unspoken history. Megan's fingers tightened around the edge of the marble countertop, her knuckles white. 8, she answered, the single word barely audible above the rain drumming against the windows. Jonathan Caldwell closed his eyes, the simple math devastating in its clarity. When he opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. Why didn't you tell me? Have you ever kept a secret so long it became part of who you are? A truth so painful you built your entire life around protecting it? Tonight, in this mansion's shadowed kitchen, a billionaire just discovered the housekeeper he hired is the woman he abandoned years ago, and the little boy running through his halls is the son he never knew existed. What would you do if the man who broke your heart suddenly held your future, and your child's, in his hands? Would you trust him again? Or would you run before he could hurt you both? Hello, my beautiful queens. Sometimes life brings us full circle in ways we never imagined. How many of us have carried burdens alone, thinking we had no choice? How many have protected our children with silence, with sacrifice, with stories that seemed kinder than the truth? My sisters, there's such strength in what you've endured, in every extra shift worked, every tear hidden, every time you chose to rise when the world gave you every reason to fall. But there's also courage in opening doors we've kept locked, in allowing others the chance to prove they've changed, in letting our children know their full story. Today's tale reminds us that while we can't rewrite our beginnings, we hold the pen for every chapter that follows. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ending can heal wounds we thought would hurt forever. You left, Megan said simply, her voice steadier now. You said you couldn't marry me. You said I deserved someone else. The words she'd rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times over the years finally spoken aloud. I was 2 months pregnant the day you walked out. I waited a week hoping you'd call. You didn't. So I decided he and I would be enough. The kitchen felt impossibly small suddenly, the space between them charged with a decade of choices neither could undo. Jonathan's tall frame seemed to fold in on itself as he leaned against the counter opposite her, his perfectly tailored suit incongruous in the homey kitchen at this late hour. I thought about you every day for years, he said, his voice cracking. Every time a relationship failed, every time I sat alone in this house, I wondered what I'd thrown away. I never imagined. He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair now touched with silver at the temples. Megan looked away, blinking hard. She hadn't prepared for this. Not for the raw pain in his voice, not for the way it still reached something deep inside her that she thought had scarred over long ago. I was wrong, Jonathan continued after a moment. I was weak. I let my family's expectations dictate my life, and I hurt the only woman I ever really loved. His voice dropped even lower, and I hurt him, without even knowing he existed. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of years, of parallel lives that should have been one. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he finally said. I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance to know my son, not to take him from you, just to be part of his life however small you'll allow. Megan studied him for a long time. The Jonathan she'd known at 22 had been brilliant, ambitious, but ultimately bowed by the weight of family legacy. The man before her now carried different burdens. Success, yes, but also the unmistakable hollowness of a life built on compromise. She saw the regret carved into his face, the loneliness he had carried as silently as she had. Start small, she said finally. Saturday mornings. The lake. Teach him to skip stones. See if he likes you. The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. He nodded, grateful. Thank you. If you've ever protected someone you love with a difficult choice, hit that like button right now. Morning came too quickly. Megan woke before dawn, her mind racing with the implications of last night's conversation. Henry still slept peacefully in his room across the hall, blissfully unaware that his world had tilted on its axis. She slipped from bed and padded to the window, looking out over the mist-covered grounds of the Caldwell estate. The east wing where they lived was comfortable beyond anything she could have provided on her own. Spacious rooms with high ceilings, plush carpets, windows that let in streams of golden light. For the past month, it had been their sanctuary, a place to rebuild after everything had fallen apart in Chicago. Now it felt like a beautiful trap. She could leave, pack their meager belongings and disappear before Jonathan woke. She had enough saved from her first month's salary to get them somewhere new, start over again. She'd done it before, but Henry's asthma had improved dramatically since they'd arrived. The clean Connecticut air, the space to run and play without the constant pollution of the city. His color was better, his breathing easier. Could she really take that away from him? And there was the truth she'd been avoiding since last night. Henry deserved to know his father, not the fiction of a dead hero she'd created, but the complicated, flawed reality of the man who had helped bring him into the world. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Mom!" Henry's voice, still thick with sleep. "Can I have pancakes?" Megan smiled despite herself. 8 years old and already so certain of what he wanted. "Coming, sweetheart." In the small kitchenette of their wing, she mixed batter while Henry set the table, his dark hair sticking up in the same impossible cowlick that had always plagued Jonathan. The resemblance that had once been a private ache was now glaringly obvious to her. How had she thought no one would notice? "Mr. Caldwell looked sad yesterday," Henry said suddenly, carefully arranging his fork and knife. "When I told him about your grilled cheese." Megan nearly dropped the mixing bowl. "Did he?" Henry nodded solemnly. His eyes got all crinkly at the corners, like yours do when you're trying not to cry. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, honey." She set the bowl down and crouched to his level. "You didn't say anything wrong. Mr. Caldwell just has a lot on his mind." "Is that why he was in our kitchen last night?" Megan froze. "You were awake?" Henry shrugged. "I got thirsty. I heard voices, but I went back to bed." He looked at her with those thoughtful brown eyes, Jonathan's eyes. "Were you fighting?" "No, we were just talking." She brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Grown-up stuff. About me." Sometimes his perceptiveness still caught her off guard. "Why would you think that?" "Because he keeps looking at me funny, like he's trying to figure something out." Before she could formulate a response, there was another knock, this one at the main door to their wing. Megan straightened, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Finish setting the table, okay?" She opened the door to find Mrs. Ellis, the head housekeeper, her silver hair immaculately pinned as always despite the early hour. "Good morning, Megan," she said warmly. "Mr. Caldwell asked me to deliver this." She handed over a cream-colored envelope, heavy stationery with the Caldwell crest embossed in the corner. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellis." The older woman hesitated. "Is everything all right, dear? You look like you haven't slept." Megan managed a smile. "Just a restless night. Nothing to worry about." Mrs. Ellis nodded, though her eyes remained concerned. "Well, if you need anything at all, you know where to find me." When the door closed, Megan opened the envelope with unsteady fingers. "Megan, I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again this evening, after Henry is asleep. There are practical matters we should discuss. I'll be in the library at 9. Jonathan. Formal, controlled, so different from the raw emotion of last night. This was the Jonathan the world saw. Measured, deliberate, every word carefully chosen. She'd almost forgotten that version of him existed alongside the man who had stood in her kitchen with tears in his eyes. The day passed in a blur of routine tasks, dusting the formal dining room, polishing the silver in the butler's pantry, changing linens in the guest rooms. All the while, her mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with memories she'd locked away for years. As she worked, she found herself drawn back to that humid August evening in Boston. 10 years ago, the cafe near the Charles River had been their place. A tiny establishment with mismatched chairs and the best coffee in Cambridge. They'd studied there during finals, celebrated job offers there, dreamed about their future there. It seemed fitting, somehow, that it would also be where everything ended. Jonathan had been quiet all evening, barely touching his espresso, his eyes fixed on the table between them rather than on her face. Megan had known something was wrong, had felt it in the stiffness of his shoulders when she'd hugged him hello, in the way he'd barely returned her kiss. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the words that finally came. "I can't marry you, Megan," he'd said, eyes still fixed on the table. "My family, they've already arranged things. Expectations I can't walk away from. You deserve someone who can give you everything. I'm not that man, not anymore." She'd sat stunned, the words landing like stones. The small velvet box she'd found in his drawer the week before, the ring she'd pretended not to have seen, flashed through her mind. Along with the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning, the second pink line faint but unmistakable. "What are you saying?" she'd managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "What expectations?" "Jonathan, we've been planning our future for 2 years." "I know." He'd finally looked up then, his expression a mask of resignation. "But the Caldwell name comes with responsibilities I can't ignore. The merger with Westfield Industries depends on connections. Family connections." Understanding had dawned with sickening clarity. "They want you to marry someone else. Someone who benefits the business." He hadn't denied it. "My father made it clear. Either I step into the role that's been planned for me since birth, or I'm cut off. Not just financially, but from everything, the family, the business, the foundation work. And that matters more than us?" The question had torn from her throat, raw with betrayal. "You don't understand what it means to be a Caldwell." His voice had hardened then, a defense mechanism she recognized. "The legacy goes back generations. Thousands of employees depend on the company's stability. I can't just walk away because of feelings." Feelings. As if what they'd shared could be reduced to such a small word. "I see." She'd stood then, dignity the only thing keeping her upright. "Well, thank you for your honesty, Jonathan. I wouldn't want to interfere with the Caldwell legacy." "Megan, please." He'd reached for her hand, but she'd pulled away. "Don't." The word had been quiet but firm. "Just don't." He'd stood then too, reaching into his pocket and placing several bills on the table, enough to cover their drinks and then some, as if money could somehow soften the blow. "I'm sorry," he'd said, and for a moment, she'd almost believed him. "You deserve better." Then he'd walked away, his tall figure disappearing through the door and into the summer evening, leaving her alone with a cooling espresso and the secret growing inside her. She'd waited a week after that, hoping against hope that he'd call, that he'd change his mind, that what they'd shared would prove stronger than family pressure and business mergers. Each day of silence had been another stone in the wall she began building around her heart. On the 8th day, she'd packed her apartment, withdrawn from her graduate program, and bought a one-way ticket to Chicago. She told no one where she was going. Not her few friends in Boston, certainly not Jonathan. She'd disappeared as completely as if she'd never existed. And in the years that followed, as she built a life for herself and Henry in Chicago, she'd sometimes wondered if that wasn't exactly what had happened. If the Megan who had loved Jonathan Caldwell with her whole heart had indeed ceased to exist, replaced by a woman who couldn't afford the luxury of dreams. Now, standing in the mansion he'd inherited, dusting priceless antiques that had been in his family for generations, she felt the bitter irony of it all. She had run as far as she could, only to end up exactly where she'd started. Caught in the gravity of Jonathan Caldwell's world, with far more at stake than just her own heart. The library doors were imposing, 10 feet tall, carved oak panels that had witnessed a century of Caldwell family discussions. At precisely 9 o'clock, Megan stood before them, smoothing her simple black dress with damp palms. She changed out of her work clothes, a small act of defiance. She wouldn't meet him as his employee tonight. She knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. Jonathan stood by the fireplace, silhouetted against the dancing flames. He changed too, the formal suit replaced by dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that reminded her painfully of their college days. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the leather armchairs arranged before the fire. "Would you like something to drink? There's wine, or I can have tea brought up." "I'm fine." Megan took a seat, perching on the edge of the chair. "You wanted to discuss practical matters?" Jonathan sat across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Yes, about Henry. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've spent the day thinking about how to proceed. I don't want to disrupt his life more than I already have by my absence. Your absence was your choice, Megan reminded him quietly. A choice I made without all the facts. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If I had known you were pregnant, you would have what? Megan interrupted. Defied your family? Walked away from your precious legacy? I don't think so, Jonathan. You made your priorities very clear that night. He flinched as if she'd struck him. You're right. I can't change the past. But I can try to do better now. He took a deep breath. I'd like to establish a trust for Henry. For his education, his healthcare, whatever he needs. And I'd like your permission to spend time with him to get to know him. As you suggested, starting small. Megan studied him, searching for the manipulation, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was the same raw vulnerability from the night before. The trust isn't necessary. We've managed this long without your money. At what cost, Megan? His voice was gentle but insistent. I saw the medical bills in your nightstand when Mrs. Ellis was showing you the wing. Henry's asthma treatments, the specialists. You went through my things? Anger flashed hot in her chest. No. Mrs. Ellis mentioned you were concerned about medical expenses. I made inquiries. At her expression, he added hastily, not about personal details, just general costs for the treatments Henry needs. Megan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, darkness had swallowed the manicured grounds, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Do you have any idea what it's like? Working 3 jobs and still watching your child struggle to breathe because you can't afford the best treatments? Choosing between rent and medicine. Behind her, she heard Jonathan rise, his footsteps soft on the Persian rug. No, he admitted quietly. I don't. But I'd like to help now, if you'll let me. She turned to face him. Why should I trust you? You walked away once. What happens when this novelty wears off? When playing weekend father becomes inconvenient? Because Henry isn't a novelty or an inconvenience. He's my son. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. I've missed 8 years of his life. I don't want to miss any more. Something in his voice, a certainty she'd never heard before, gave her pause. And what do we tell him? That his dead father has miraculously returned from the grave. Jonathan winced. Is that what you told him? That I died. It was easier than explaining that his father chose a business merger over his mother. The words were sharp, but the anger behind them had dulled with time. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, honey. Your daddy decided we weren't good enough? You could have told me, Megan. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Whatever you thought of me, I had a right to know. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Maybe, she conceded. But you have to understand. I was 26, alone, terrified. You'd made your choice so clearly. I couldn't bear to have you reject him too. The silence that followed was heavy with shared regret, with the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Finally, Jonathan spoke again. We need to tell him the truth. Not all at once, perhaps, but he deserves to know who I am. Megan nodded slowly. Yes, but not yet. Let him get to know you first as a person, not as the father who's been absent his whole life. Agreed. Jonathan hesitated, then added, There's something else. My mother will be visiting for Thanksgiving next month. She doesn't know about you or Henry yet. The mention of Eleanor Caldwell sent a chill through Megan. The formidable matriarch had never approved of her son's college girlfriend, the scholarship student with no family connections, no pedigree. Will you tell her? I have to, but I wanted to warn you first. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. She'll be difficult. Some things never change, Megan murmured. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Some things do. His eyes held hers for a moment too long, and she looked away first. Saturday morning, then, she said, moving toward the door. for Henry's first lesson in stone skipping. I'll be ready. He didn't try to stop her as she left, but she felt his gaze follow her all the way out. Back in the East Wing, Megan checked on Henry, fast asleep with his favorite dinosaur tucked under one arm. She brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, studying the features she'd memorized over 8 years. The straight nose, the stubborn chin, the long eyelashes that were all Jonathan. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the sleeping child. "Am I making another mistake?" Henry shifted in his sleep but didn't wake. No answers there. In her own room, Megan pulled out the small wooden box she kept hidden at the bottom of her suitcase. Inside lay the few mementos she'd allowed herself to keep. A faded photograph of her and Jonathan on the banks of the Charles River, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. A pressed flower from the first bouquet he'd given her, the acceptance letter to the graduate program she'd abandoned. Beneath these, wrapped in tissue paper, was the smallest item, a tiny hospital bracelet with Baby Boy Harper printed in fading ink. She'd kept it as a reminder of those first days alone, of the strength she'd found when she had no choice but to be strong. Now, holding it in her palm, she wondered if strength sometimes meant letting go of old wounds, of carefully constructed walls. If perhaps Henry deserved the chance to know his father, regardless of her own complicated feelings. She returned the bracelet to its hiding place, decision made. She would give Jonathan this chance for Henry's sake. But she would watch carefully, protect fiercely. She wouldn't let her son experience the same rejection she had endured. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that painted the Connecticut countryside in gold and crimson. Henry bounced with excitement as they walked down to the lake, peppering Megan with questions. "Why does Mr. Caldwell want to teach me to skip stones? Does he have kids? Is he nice? Can I show him my rock collection?" Megan smiled despite her anxiety. "One question at a time, sweetheart. Mr. Caldwell doesn't have other children. Yes, he can be nice, and I'm sure he'd love to see your rocks. But why me?" Henry persisted, kicking at fallen leaves. "He's so rich and important. Mom, he has a helicopter. I saw it in the magazine in his library. How to answer that?" "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people who seem to have everything are actually missing the most important things, like someone to teach stone skipping to." Henry considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. "That's sad." "Yes," Megan agreed softly. "It is." Jonathan was waiting at the small dock, hands in the pockets of his jacket, looking uncharacteristically nervous. When he spotted them, he straightened, a smile transforming his features. "Good morning," he called, walking to meet them. "Perfect day for stone skipping, wouldn't you say?" Henry nodded enthusiastically. "I brought my own rocks." He proudly held up the small pouch he'd filled with perfect skipping stones, collected from the garden path. Jonathan crouched to Henry's level, examining the offerings with exaggerated seriousness. "Excellent choices. You have a good eye." He selected one, testing its weight in his palm. "This one might get 5 skips at least." Henry beamed at the praise, and something twisted in Megan's chest. Joy and pain so intertwined she couldn't separate them. "I'll be up at the gazebo," she said, pointing to the small structure overlooking the lake. "Have fun." As she walked away, she heard Jonathan asking Henry about his favorite subjects in school, the boy's animated response carrying across the still morning air. From the gazebo, she watched them, Jonathan demonstrating the perfect wrist flick, Henry's look of concentration as he tried to mimic the movement, their shared delight when a stone skipped 3 times before sinking. They looked so natural together, as if the years of separation had never happened. The sight brought tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. If you've ever had to start over when everything fell apart, comment New Beginnings below and share this with a sister who needs to hear this story. The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Saturday mornings became sacred, Jonathan and Henry exploring the estate grounds, fishing in the lake, examining the vintage car collection in the garage. Henry returned from these outings flushed with excitement, full of stories about Mr. Caldwell and his adventures. "He's been to Africa, Mom," He showed me pictures of elephants he saw, and he promised to take me someday if you say it's okay," Henry added, clearly having been coached on this point. Megan had smiled, touched by Jonathan's respect for her authority. "We'll see, sweetheart. That's a big trip." Meanwhile, her own interactions with Jonathan remained carefully cordial. They discussed Henry's schedule, his school progress, his health, never venturing into the dangerous territory of their shared past or uncertain future. It was easier that way, safer. But sometimes, catching him looking at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, she glimpsed something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. A longing that mirrored her own carefully buried feelings. October slipped into November, bringing shorter days and the first hints of winter. Henry's asthma improved steadily in the clean country air, his cheeks gaining color, his energy boundless. Megan found unexpected satisfaction in her work at the mansion, in restoring beauty to rooms that had been neglected during Jonathan's long absences. She learned from Mrs. Ellis that he had rarely spent more than a few days at the estate before their arrival, preferring his Manhattan penthouse or London flat. Now, he had canceled 3 international trips and conducted most business from his home office. "Never seen anything like it," Mrs. Ellis confided one afternoon as they polished silver together. "10 years I've worked here, and Mr. Caldwell's never stayed put this long. Something's changed in him." Megan had merely nodded, unwilling to examine the implications too closely. The peaceful routine they'd established shattered the week before Thanksgiving, when Eleanor Caldwell arrived unannounced 2 days earlier than expected. Megan was in the main hall, arranging fresh flowers in the massive crystal vase that centered the entryway, when the front doors swung open. A blast of cold air preceded the elegant figure who swept in, trailing designer luggage and a harried-looking assistant. "Where is my son?" Eleanor demanded without preamble, stripping off leather gloves. Her sharp gaze landed on Megan, narrowing slightly. "You're new." Megan straightened, painfully aware of her work uniform and messy ponytail. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Megan Harper, the new housekeeper for the East Wing." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Recognition? But that was impossible. They'd never met, though Jonathan had mentioned his mother's uncanny memory for names and faces. Perhaps she recalled Megan from photographs Jonathan had shown years ago. "Harper," Eleanor repeated, the name like ice on her tongue. "Tell Jonathan I've arrived. I'll be in the blue suite." "Of course, Mrs. Caldwell." Megan moved to the house phone to call Jonathan's office, feeling Eleanor's gaze boring into her back. The next morning, disaster struck. Henry, excited by the mansion's pre-Thanksgiving bustle, had been exploring the main house, something Megan usually discouraged but had allowed as she helped prepare guest rooms. He encountered Eleanor in the conservatory, where she was instructing the florist on arrangements. "Hello," he'd said with his usual friendly confidence. "I'm Henry. Do you live here too?" Eleanor had turned, annoyed at the interruption, then frozen, staring at the boy with an expression of dawning comprehension. "No," she'd replied slowly. "I'm Mrs. Caldwell, Jonathan's mother." Her eyes hadn't left Henry's face, cataloging every feature with growing alarm. "And who might you be?" "Henry Harper. My mom works here. We live in the East Wing." "Harper," Eleanor had repeated, the same way she'd said Megan's name, like something distasteful found on the bottom of her shoe. "How interesting. And how old are you, Henry?" "8, almost 9 in February." By the time Megan found them, alerted by a concerned gardener who'd witnessed the exchange, Eleanor's face had transformed into a mask of cold fury. She dismissed Henry with instructions to find Mrs. Ellis for a cookie, then rounded on Megan the moment he was out of earshot. "You?" she hissed, advancing until they were inches apart. "I remember you now. The scholarship girl Jonathan was infatuated with in college. The one who conveniently disappeared." Megan stood her ground. "Mrs. Caldwell, don't." Eleanor cut her off with a slashing gesture. "That boy is the spitting image of Jonathan at the same age. Did you think no one would notice? Did you come here to blackmail my son?" "I came here because I needed work," Megan replied evenly, though her heart raced. I had no idea Jonathan owned this estate when I applied for the position. A likely story. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand closed around Megan's wrist. Listen carefully. Whatever scheme you've concocted, it won't work. The Caldwell name has survived far worse threats than some housekeepers. That's enough, Mother. Jonathan's voice, cold with a fury Megan had never heard before, cut through the conservatory. He stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Eleanor released Megan's wrist. Jonathan, I was just having a fascinating conversation with your employee. I heard exactly what you were saying. He crossed to stand beside Megan, his presence solid, protective. And if you ever speak about Henry that way again, you will no longer be welcome in my home. Eleanor's eyes widened in genuine shock. You can't be serious. You would choose this woman and her child over your own mother? Over your family? Henry is my family. The simple declaration hung in the air. My son. You've acknowledged this situation? Eleanor's voice rose in disbelief. There is no situation, Mother. There is only the fact that I have a son I didn't know about for 8 years, and I intend to make up for lost time. Jonathan's hand found Megan's, squeezing gently. Both Megan and Henry are under my protection now. You will treat them with respect, or you will leave. Eleanor stared at their joined hands, then at her son's resolute expression. Something shifted in her eyes, not acceptance but calculation. We need to discuss this privately. The implications for the company, for the family name. No. Jonathan's voice was firm. There's nothing to discuss. Henry is my son. That's all that matters. For a moment, Eleanor looked as if she might argue further. Then her training reasserted itself, the impeccable social mask sliding back into place. Very well. We'll speak later, when you're thinking more clearly. She swept from the room without another glance at Megan. When she was gone, Jonathan released Megan's hand, turning to face her. I'm sorry. I should have warned her before she arrived. It's not your fault. Megan rubbed her wrist where Eleanor's grip had left red marks. I should have kept Henry in our wing. No. Jonathan's voice was fierce. This is his home too now. He shouldn't have to hide. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she remembered well. I knew she would be difficult, but I didn't expect this level of hostility. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he glanced toward the doorway his mother had just exited. She's always been protective of the family name, but this crosses a line. Megan sighed, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her suddenly exhausted. She's afraid, Jonathan. You've upended everything she thought she knew about your life, about the future she planned for you. You're defending her? His eyebrows rose in surprise. After what she just said about Henry? No, never that. Megan's voice hardened. But I understand fear. It makes people lash out, say terrible things. She looked up at him, really looked at him for perhaps the first time since their reunion. Thank you for standing up for us. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, regret, determination. I should have done it 10 years ago. The weight of that admission hung between them. All the what-ifs and might-have-beens too heavy to acknowledge fully. We need to tell Henry, Megan said finally. After what just happened, he's going to have questions. And I don't want him hearing anything from your mother first. Jonathan nodded, his expression grave. Tonight, she agreed. They found Henry in the kitchen with Mrs. Ellis, happily helping to roll out pie dough for Thanksgiving desserts, his small hands dusted with flour. He looked up with a bright smile that faltered slightly when he saw their serious expressions. Am I in trouble? He asked immediately. I didn't mean to bother the scary lady. She asked me questions. Mrs. Ellis, sensing the tension, discreetly excused herself with a murmured comment about checking the linen inventory. You're not in trouble, sweetheart, Megan assured him, taking a seat at the kitchen island. But Mr. Caldwell and I need to talk to you about something important. Henry wiped his hands on his apron, his expression turning solemn. He had always been perceptive, quick to read emotional undercurrents. Is it about my asthma? Is it getting worse again? No, nothing like that, Jonathan said gently, sitting beside Megan. It's about me. About who I am. Henry looked between them, confusion evident. You're Mr. Caldwell. You own this house and a helicopter, and you're teaching me to skip stones. Despite the gravity of the moment, Jonathan smiled. Yes, all that's true, but there's something else. He glanced at Megan, seeking permission to continue. She nodded slightly, her heart pounding so hard she was certain they could hear it. Henry, Jonathan began carefully, do you remember what your mom told you about your father? The boy's brow furrowed. That he died before I was born. In an accident. His gaze darted to Megan. Mom keeps his picture in her special box, but she doesn't know I saw it once. Megan felt tears prick her eyes. She'd had no idea Henry had found the photograph. The thing is, Jonathan continued, his voice steady despite the emotion Megan could see he was fighting to control. That's not exactly what happened. Your father didn't die. He faltered, searching for words. What Mr. Caldwell is trying to say, Megan stepped in, reaching for Henry's small hand, is that he is your father, Henry. Silence fell in the kitchen, broken only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Henry stared at them both, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first sparks of anger. But you said he was dead, he finally said, his voice small but accusatory as he looked at Megan. You lied to me. The simple truth of it struck her like a physical blow. Yes, she admitted, her voice breaking. I did. I thought it would be easier than explaining that he wasn't part of our lives. Why weren't you? Henry turned to Jonathan, the question direct and unflinching. If you're my dad, why weren't you there? For my birthdays or when I was in the hospital with asthma or anything? Jonathan swallowed hard. Because I didn't know about you, Henry. Your mom and we separated before she knew she was going to have you. And by the time she found out, I was gone. You left her. The accusation in those 3 words was devastating in its simplicity. Yes, Jonathan didn't flinch from the truth. I made a terrible mistake. I let other people tell me what was important, instead of listening to my own heart. And because of that, I missed knowing the most important person in the world, you. Henry's eyes filled with tears. So you didn't want us? No, that's not, Jonathan began. But Henry had already slid off his stool, backing away from them both. You lied, he said again to Megan, his voice trembling. And you left, to Jonathan. He turned and ran from the kitchen, leaving a trail of flowery footprints in his wake. Megan moved to follow, but Jonathan caught her arm gently. Give him a minute, he said softly. It's a lot to process. She sank back onto her stool, tears flowing freely now. I've ruined everything. I should never have lied to him. You did what you thought was right, Jonathan said. We both made mistakes, Megan. Terrible ones. But we can't change the past. We can only try to do better now. She looked up at him through her tears, struck by the maturity in his words. So different from the young man who had walked away from her a decade ago. When did you get so wise? A sad smile touched his lips. Somewhere between the 3rd failed relationship and the 5th empty business triumph. Turns out success isn't much comfort when you're alone. Before she could respond, Mrs. Ellis appeared in the doorway, her normally composed face creased with worry. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the young master has taken his coat and run outside. With the temperature dropping, Megan was on her feet instantly. Which way did he go? Toward the lake, I believe. Jonathan was already moving. I'll find him. The paths can be treacherous after dark, and there's a storm coming in. He grabbed his coat from the hook by the kitchen door. Stay here in case he circles back. Megan shook her head firmly. He's my son. I'm coming with you. Something in her tone must have conveyed her determination, because Jonathan simply nodded, grabbing a second coat and handing it to her. Stay close. The grounds are extensive, and it's getting dark fast. They hurried out into the gathering dusk, the wind already picking up, carrying the scent of snow. The temperature had dropped dramatically in the last hour, and Megan felt fear clutch at her heart. Henry's asthma was always worse in cold weather. "Henry!" she called, her voice swallowed by the wind. "Henry, please come back." They followed the path toward the lake, Jonathan's flashlight cutting through the deepening shadows. The beam caught on something small and dark on the dock. Henry's favorite dinosaur toy, the one he carried everywhere. "He's been here," Jonathan said, picking it up. "Recently." A sudden gust of wind brought the first snowflakes, earlier than forecast. Megan pulled her coat tighter, scanning the shoreline desperately. "Henry, it's okay to be angry, but please come out now." Only the wind answered, whistling through the bare trees. "The boathouse," Jonathan said suddenly. "He might have gone there for shelter." They hurried along the shore to the small wooden structure where Jonathan kept a rowboat and fishing equipment. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, huddled in the farthest corner, they found Henry. His face was tear-streaked. His breathing labored in a way that sent ice through Megan's veins. "Henry!" She rushed to him, dropping to her knees. "Sweetheart, you're breathing. Where's your inhaler?" "Don't have it," he managed between wheezes. "Left it in my room." Jonathan was already on his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Winters. He lives on the property." To Megan, he added, "He's Henry's new specialist. I arranged it after I saw the medical records." Under different circumstances, Megan might have been angry at this presumption. Now she was only grateful. Henry needs his medication. Dr. Winters met them at the service entrance, medical bag in hand. He took one look at Henry and immediately administered a breathing treatment, his movements efficient and calm. "Let's get him to a warm room," he instructed. "Keep him upright to ease his breathing." They moved to the library, where a fire was already burning in the massive stone fireplace. Mrs. Ellis appeared with warm blankets and hot water bottles, her face lined with concern. Gradually, with medication and warmth, Henry's breathing eased. The blue tinge left his lips, replaced by a more natural color. He leaned against Megan on the sofa, exhausted but no longer in immediate danger. "He should rest now," Dr. Winters said, packing away his equipment. "I'll leave additional medication in case there's another episode. But he's stable." He glanced at Jonathan. "You got to him quickly. That made all the difference." After the doctor left, a heavy silence fell over the library. Henry, drowsy from the medication but still awake, looked between Megan and Jonathan with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry I ran away," he said in a small voice. "Oh, sweetheart." Megan hugged him gently. "We're the ones who should be sorry. We should have told you the truth from the beginning." "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked, the question piercing in its directness. Megan hesitated, then decided he deserved complete honesty. "I don't know. I was afraid. Afraid you'd be hurt. Afraid you'd be angry. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself." Henry absorbed this, then turned to Jonathan. "And you really didn't know about me?" Jonathan shook his head, moving to kneel before the sofa so he was at eye level with his son. "No. If I had known, nothing could have kept me away. Not my family, not my business, nothing." His voice was thick with emotion. "I've missed so much of your life, Henry, and I will regret that every day. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of whatever comes next." Henry studied him with those thoughtful brown eyes, so like Jonathan's own. "Do I have to call you Dad?" A small, sad smile touched Jonathan's lips. "No. You can call me whatever makes you comfortable." "And we don't have to leave?" Henry glanced at Megan. "The scary lady. Your mom. She seemed like she wanted us to go away." "This is your home now," Jonathan said firmly. "Both of you. My mother will have to accept that, or she can return to Boston." Henry nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Then, with the resilience of childhood, he changed subjects entirely. "Can I have hot chocolate? Mrs. Ellis makes it with real chocolate and tiny marshmallows." The tension broke, and Megan found herself laughing through her tears. "Yes, I think that can be arranged. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mrs. Ellis appeared in the doorway. I took the liberty of preparing a tray, she said, wheeling in a cart with steaming mugs and a plate of cookies. I thought everyone could use something warm after the excitement. Henry's face lit up, his earlier distress temporarily forgotten in the face of chocolate and marshmallows. As Mrs. Ellis helped him sit up and arranged the tray, Jonathan moved to sit beside Megan on the sofa. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting me help tonight, for trusting me with him. Megan nodded, too emotionally drained for words. But when his hand found hers on the cushion between them, she didn't pull away. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance to make things right, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that touch your heart. The days following Henry's asthma attack brought a fragile new understanding to the household. Eleanor Caldwell, faced with her son's unwavering stance, retreated into frigid politeness. She remained for Thanksgiving dinner, a tense affair where conversation revolved carefully around neutral topics, then departed for Boston the following morning, citing pressing foundation matters that required her attention. She'll come around, Jonathan said as they watched her car disappear down the long driveway. Eventually. Will she? Megan asked, skeptical. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. 10 years ago I would have said no. But people can change, Megan. I have. Indeed, the change in Jonathan was becoming more apparent each day. The driven, sometimes distant businessman now made time for evening board games with Henry, for weekend explorations of the estate grounds, for conversations about dinosaurs and space and whatever else captured his son's imagination. More surprising to Megan was the change in herself, the gradual softening of the protective walls she'd built around her heart. She found herself looking forward to the moments when the three of them were together, found herself laughing more easily, dreaming more freely. December arrived with a blanket of snow that transformed the estate into a winter wonderland. Henry, fully recovered from his asthma attack and adapting to the new reality of his family, threw himself into preparations for his first Christmas in the mansion. Do you think we can get a tree as tall as the ceiling? He asked one evening as they sat in the library, the fire crackling merrily in the grate. Billy at school said rich people always have giant trees. Jonathan chuckled. We can certainly try. There's a tree farm about 20 miles from here where we can choose one ourselves. Really? Henry's eyes widened. We get to cut it down and everything? That's the tradition, Jonathan confirmed. My father used to take me every year when I was about your age. Megan, curled in an armchair with a book, looked up in surprise. Jonathan rarely spoke of his father, who had died when he was in his early 20s. The few mentions had always been tinged with a complicated mix of respect and resentment. What was he like? She asked softly. Your father. Jonathan's expression grew distant, complicated, brilliant in business, demanding at home. The Caldwell legacy was everything to him, continuing the family name, expanding the family fortune. He glanced at Henry, who was listening with rapt attention. He wasn't an easy man to please. Did he teach you to skip stones? Henry asked. A smile touched Jonathan's lips. No, that was my grandfather, my mother's father. He was different, gentler. He taught me to fish, to sail, to appreciate beauty for its own sake, not just for its value. Is that why you have all those paintings? Henry gestured to the artwork that adorned the library walls. Original pieces by renowned artists, collected over generations. Some of them, Jonathan acknowledged. Others were investments. My father believed everything should serve a purpose, preferably a profitable one. That sounds sad, Henry said with a child's direct honesty. Didn't he ever do things just because they were fun? Jonathan seemed startled by the question. I don't think he knew how, he said finally. Fun wasn't a priority in the Caldwell household. Is that why you left Mom? Henry asked, the question landing like a stone in still water. Because your dad said you had to? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Megan started to intervene, to deflect the painful question, but Jonathan held up a hand. In a way, he said carefully. My father had died by then, but I was still trying to live by his rules. To be the son he wanted, even though he wasn't there to see it. He looked directly at Henry. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I hurt your mother very badly, and I missed knowing you. I've regretted it every day since. Henry absorbed this with the solemn consideration he brought to all important matters. But you're not following those rules anymore? No, Jonathan said firmly. I'm trying to make my own rules now. Better ones. Henry nodded, apparently satisfied. Good, because those old rules were stupid. He returned his attention to the Christmas catalog spread before him. The conversation concluded in his mind. Megan and Jonathan exchanged a glance over his head. Amusement, wonder, and something deeper neither was quite ready to name. Later that evening, after Henry had gone to bed, Megan found Jonathan still in the library, staring into the dying embers of the fire. He has your directness, Jonathan said without turning, cutting straight to the heart of things. And your stubbornness? Megan countered, settling into the chair opposite him. Once he makes up his mind, wild horses couldn't change it. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind they'd begun to share more frequently in recent weeks. Not the tense, guarded silences of their early reunion, but something gentler, more contemplative. I never thanked you, Jonathan said finally, for giving him my name. Megan looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Henry. It was my grandfather's name, my mother's father. The one I told Henry about tonight. Understanding dawned. I didn't know, she admitted. I chose it because it felt right. Strong but gentle. She hesitated, then added softly, like the best parts of you. Jonathan's eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her heart beat faster. There were times, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, in the years after I left, when I would see a woman with your walk, or hear someone laugh like you, and I'd feel this physical pain, like something vital had been torn away. I told myself it would fade with time. Did it? The question slipped out before she could stop it. No. The simple admission hung in the air between them. I just got better at ignoring it. Megan looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. I was so angry for so long, she confessed. Not just because you left, but because even after everything, there were moments when I missed you so much I couldn't breathe. Megan. Her name was a plea on his lips. I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any chance? Could we start again? Not from the beginning. Too much has happened for that. But from here now. She met his gaze, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear of rejection he couldn't quite hide. I don't know, she answered honestly. There's so much history between us, Jonathan. So much hurt. And it's not just about us anymore. Henry has to come first. Of course, he agreed quickly. Always. I would never suggest otherwise. But, she continued, her voice softening, I think I'd like to try. Slowly. The hope that bloomed in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Slowly, he echoed. I can do slowly. The tree-cutting expedition the following weekend marked a turning point. Bundled against the December cold, the three of them tramped through rows of fragrant pines at the Christmas tree farm, Henry darting ahead to examine each potential candidate with critical enthusiasm. This one, he called, standing beside a magnificent blue spruce that towered at least 12 feet tall. It's perfect. Jonathan surveyed the tree with exaggerated seriousness. I don't know. What do you think, Megan? Can we fit this monster in the library? The ceilings are 18 feet, she replied, playing along. I think we can manage. Henry bounced with excitement as Jonathan showed him how to help with the saw, the two of them working together to fell the massive tree. Watching them, dark heads bent close, the same determined set to their jaws. Megan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. This was what she had dreamed of during those lonely nights in Chicago, what she had thought forever beyond reach. A family, whole and healing. The day continued like something from a Christmas movie. Hot chocolate at a small cafe in town. A horse-drawn sleigh ride through snow-covered fields, Henry's laughter ringing out in the crisp winter air. By the time they returned to the mansion, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement, something had shifted subtly in their dynamic. They felt like a family. Decorating the tree became an all-day affair. Mrs. Ellis brought down boxes of ornaments from the attic, delicate glass baubles passed down through generations of Caldwells, alongside newer additions Jonathan had collected during his travels. "This one's from Venice," he told Henry, unwrapping a hand-blown glass star. "And this, a delicate wooden nutcracker, is from Germany. Did you get one from every place you went?" Henry asked, carefully hanging the nutcracker on a sturdy branch. "I tried to," Jonathan admitted. "It was a way of making Christmas feel less empty, even when I was alone." The simple confession touched Megan deeply. She had always imagined Jonathan's Christmases filled with glamorous parties and expensive gifts, not quiet loneliness masked by souvenirs. "Well, you're not alone this year," she said, impulsively squeezing his hand. His fingers tightened around hers, his eyes conveying what words couldn't. As December progressed, the mansion transformed. Garlands draped the grand staircase. Wreaths adorned every door, and the scent of gingerbread wafted from the kitchen where Henry helped Mrs. Ellis with her famous cookies. For the first time in years, Jonathan opened the estate to the annual staff Christmas party, inviting not just the household employees but the groundskeepers, gardeners, and their families. "My father discontinued the tradition," he explained to Megan as they watched Henry play with the gardener's grandchildren. "He said it was an unnecessary expense." "And what do you think?" she asked. Jonathan smiled, watching the joy that filled rooms too long silent. "I think some expenses are very necessary indeed." Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that blanketed the estate in pristine white. Henry, nearly bursting with excitement, could barely sit still through dinner. "Can we open just one present tonight?" he pleaded. "Please? It's tradition." "Is it now?" Jonathan asked, amused. "Whose tradition?" "Mine," Henry declared confidently. "Starting now." Megan laughed. "I think that can be arranged. One small gift tonight, the rest tomorrow morning." They gathered in the library, where the magnificent tree glittered with lights and ornaments. Henry's one small gift turned out to be a telescope. Not exactly small, but perfect for the budding astronomer who had recently developed a fascination with the night sky. "It's awesome," he exclaimed, already examining the various parts. "Can we set it up tonight?" The snow stopped, and Mrs. Ellis says it's supposed to be super clear. "After you open your other gifts," Jonathan said, handing small packages to both Henry and Megan. Henry's contained a compass that had belonged to Jonathan's grandfather. "For when we go exploring," Jonathan explained. Megan's package held a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny silver book. "Open it," Jonathan urged softly. The miniature book opened to reveal microscopic pages with actual text, the opening lines of Pride and Prejudice, her favorite novel from college days. "You remembered," she murmured, touched beyond words. "I remember everything about you, Megan," he said quietly. "I always have." The moment was interrupted by Henry's excited voice. "Mom, you have to open your big present now." "Big present?" she echoed, confused. "I thought we were only doing one tonight." "This one's special," Henry insisted, pulling her toward a large envelope he'd hidden behind the tree. "Mr. Caldwell, Dad, helped me with it." The casual use of Dad, the first time Henry had said it, wasn't lost on either adult. Jonathan's eyes shone with emotion as Megan accepted the envelope. Inside was a formal-looking document. As she read it, her hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "It's the deed to a building in Chicago," Jonathan explained. "The old diner where you worked, the one that closed. I've purchased it, and it's being renovated as we speak. If you want, it's yours to run, to make into whatever you envision." "But," Megan struggled to find words. "How did you know? You mentioned once how much you loved that place, how you dreamed of owning it someday." Henry told me it was where you took him after school, where the regulars taught him to play chess. You did this for me? She could hardly believe it. For us, Henry corrected proudly. Dad says we can go there on weekends and in the summer. I can help with the cash register. Megan looked between them, her son, vibrant with excitement, and Jonathan, watching her with hopeful uncertainty. Do you like it? He asked. If it's too much, or not what you want. She cut him off by stepping forward and, for the first time since their reunion, wrapping her arms around him in a genuine embrace. It's perfect, she whispered against his chest. Thank you. His arms came around her, tentative at first, then holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. Over her head, he exchanged a triumphant grin with Henry, who gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. Later, after Henry had finally been persuaded to go to bed with promises of telescope assembly first thing in the morning, Megan and Jonathan stood on the terrace, watching the stars emerge in the crystal-clear winter sky. You've given us so much, Megan said softly. The diner, this home, a future for Henry the first could never have provided on my own. You gave me a son, Jonathan replied simply. Nothing I could ever do would equal that gift. He turned to face her, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. I meant what I said, Megan. I want to try again, not to erase the past, but to build something new. Something better. She studied him in the moonlight, this man who was both familiar and strange. The boy she had loved, shaped by years of success and solitude into someone deeper, more thoughtful. I'm still afraid, she admitted. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of Henry being hurt. I know. He didn't try to dismiss her fears or offer empty reassurances. I can only promise to do everything in my power not to let that happen. To be worthy of the second chance you're giving me. Megan took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs. When you left, she said slowly, I thought my heart would never heal. I built walls around it, around Henry, trying to keep us safe. But I'm starting to think that safety isn't always found in walls. Where is it found? He asked, his voice gentle. In courage, maybe. In being willing to risk pain for the possibility of joy. She looked up at him, snowflakes melting on her eyelashes. I'm not ready to make promises, Jonathan, but I am ready to try. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's all I ask. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. A kiss as light as the snowflakes falling around them, but filled with promise. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for healing. Spring came to Connecticut in a riot of color. Daffodils carpeting the estate grounds, cherry blossoms framing the long driveway, new leaves unfurling on the ancient oaks. With it came changes, some subtle, others profound. Henry, now 9, had fully embraced his new reality. Jonathan was dad now, no hesitation or awkwardness in the title. Their bond had deepened through shared interests. Astronomy, sailing, the restoration of a vintage motorcycle that sat in pride of place in the garage. Megan divided her time between Connecticut and Chicago, overseeing the renovation of the diner, now renamed Harper's. She had discovered an unexpected talent for business, applying the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her an excellent housekeeper to the creation of a warm, welcoming establishment that honored the diner's history while looking toward its future. Jonathan supported her vision completely, offering advice when asked but never imposing his own ideas. This is your dream, he told her. I'm just happy to help make it reality. Their relationship had evolved too cautiously but steadily. Weekend dinners in the city after she'd spent days at the diner site. Quiet evenings on the terrace after Henry was asleep. Conversations that stretched into the night, rediscovering each other as the people they had become rather than those they had been. The physical aspect progressed more slowly. Tentative kisses, hands held under starlight, the gradual rebuilding of trust that had been so thoroughly broken. Jonathan never pushed, never presumed. His patience a testament to how deeply he valued this second chance. Eleanor Caldwell remained a complicated presence in their lives. Her initial hostility had softened somewhat in the face of Henry's undeniable charm and Jonathan's unwavering stance. But she maintained a certain reserve, particularly toward Megan. "She's trying," Jonathan said after a tense Sunday lunch where Eleanor had managed to be simultaneously polite and dismissive. "In her own way." "Is that what that was?" Megan asked dryly. "I'd hate to see her when she's not trying." He laughed, pulling her close. "Give her time. You've already won over the most important Caldwell." He nodded toward Henry, who was showing his grandmother his latest science project with infectious enthusiasm. Despite Eleanor's reservations, plans progressed for a small family wedding in June. Nothing elaborate, just a simple ceremony in the estate's rose garden, with Henry proudly serving as best man. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Jonathan asked Megan one evening as they reviewed the modest arrangements. "We could wait longer if you're not ready. Or if you'd prefer something more formal." She silenced him with a kiss. "This is exactly what I want. Us, Henry, the people who matter most. The rest is just details." The night before the wedding, Megan found herself unable to sleep. She slipped from her room, still separate from Jonathan's, a boundary that would fall tomorrow, and made her way to the kitchen for tea. To her surprise, she found Eleanor already there, elegant even in a silk robe, stirring honey into a steaming cup. "Couldn't sleep either?" the older woman asked, her tone neutral. "Pre-wedding jitters, I suppose," Megan admitted, filling the kettle. Eleanor watched her for a moment, then said abruptly, "You're not what I wanted for him." Megan turned, kettle forgotten. "I know. I had plans. Connections that would strengthen the business, the family position." "I know that too." Eleanor's perfectly manicured fingers tapped against her cup. "But he was never happy. Not with any of the suitable young women I introduced. Not with the life I envisioned." She looked up, meeting Megan's gaze directly. "He's happy now. With you and the boy." It wasn't quite an endorsement, but from Eleanor Caldwell, it was as close as Megan was likely to get. "Yes," she said simply. "We're happy too." Eleanor nodded once, decisively. "Then I suppose I'll have to accept that my son knows his own mind after all." She rose gracefully. "I've had a trust established for Henry, for his education and future. Jonathan doesn't know. I'd prefer to keep it between us for now." Megan was stunned by the unexpected gesture. "Thank you. That's very generous." "He's a Caldwell," Eleanor said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps in her mind it did. "Good night, Megan. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be significant." After she'd gone, Megan sat alone in the kitchen, marveling at the strange turns life could take. 10 years ago, she had fled Boston heartbroken and alone, certain that Jonathan Caldwell and his world were lost to her forever. Now, she was hours away from becoming his wife, from officially making their unconventional family whole. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the June roses at their peak, their fragrance filling the garden. Henry, solemn in his new suit, took his responsibilities as best man with grave importance, carefully guarding the rings Jonathan had entrusted to him. Mrs. Ellis helped Megan dress in the simple ivory gown she had chosen, elegant but understated, like the small gathering itself. As she fastened the pearl earrings that had been her mother's, Megan caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused, struck by the woman reflected there. Not the frightened young student who had fled Boston, nor the struggling single mother who had worked 3 jobs in Chicago, but someone new, someone who had been forged through hardship into strength, through pain into resilience. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Ellis said softly, adjusting the simple veil. "Absolutely radiant." "Thank you," Megan replied, smoothing the silk of her gown. "For everything. For welcoming us when we first arrived. For being so kind to Henry. That boy is a blessing," Mrs. Ellis said firmly. "And you've brought life back to this house. It was too quiet before, too empty." She checked her watch. "It's nearly time. Are you ready?" Megan took a deep breath, centering herself in this moment that once seemed impossible. "Yes, I'm ready." The garden ceremony was everything she had hoped for. Intimate, meaningful, focused on the three people who had found their way back to each other against all odds. Jonathan waited beneath an arch of climbing roses, his expression transforming as Megan appeared on the stone path. Henry stood proudly at his father's side, beaming as he watched his mother approach. The vows they exchanged were simple but profound, acknowledging both the pain of their past and the promise of their future. "I choose you, Megan," Jonathan said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Not because of duty or expectation, but because loving you is the truest thing I've ever known. I promise to honor that truth every day, to be the husband and father our family deserves." When it was her turn, Megan's voice wavered slightly, but her words were clear. "I choose you, Jonathan, not despite our past, but with full awareness of it, of how far we've come and how much we've grown. I promise to build this new chapter with you in trust and honesty, to create the family we were always meant to be." Henry's moment came when the minister asked for the rings. With solemn dignity, he presented them on the small velvet cushion he'd insisted on carrying, then added his own unscripted contribution. "I promise to be a good son," he announced clearly, looking between his parents, "and to remember that even when things seem broken, they can be fixed if you try hard enough." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden after that. The small reception that followed was held on the terrace overlooking the lake where Jonathan had first taught Henry to skip stones. As twilight descended, lanterns glowed among the trees, casting a magical light over the celebration. Eleanor Caldwell, elegant in pale blue silk, approached the newlyweds with 2 crystal flutes of champagne. "Congratulations," she said, her usual reserve softened slightly. "It was a lovely ceremony." "Thank you, Mother," Jonathan replied, accepting the glass. "I'm glad you were here to share it." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Megan. "The Caldwell women have a tradition," she said, removing a small velvet box from her evening bag. "This has been passed down for generations, from mother to daughter-in-law." Inside the box lay a platinum pendant, an intricate design of intertwined C's surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It represents continuity," Eleanor explained, "the unbroken line of family." Megan was speechless at the unexpected gesture. "It's beautiful," she finally managed. "Thank you." "Welcome to the family, Megan," Eleanor said formally, then added in a lower voice, "Take care of them both." Before Megan could respond, Henry bounded up, excitement overriding his earlier formality. "Mom, Dad, Mrs. Ellis says it's time to cut the cake. And then can we please light the lanterns for the lake?" "You promised." The floating lanterns had been Henry's special request. Paper lights to be released onto the water as darkness fell, carrying wishes for the future. Jonathan had readily agreed, always eager to create new family traditions distinct from the more rigid Caldwell customs of his childhood. "Of course, buddy," Jonathan said, ruffling his son's hair. "Cake first, then lanterns." As the evening progressed, Megan found a quiet moment to slip away to the dock, needing a breath of solitude to absorb the day's emotions. The lake stretched before her, dark and peaceful under the emerging stars. "Hiding from your own wedding?" Jonathan's voice came softly from behind her. She turned with a smile. "Just catching my breath. It's been quite a day." "Regrets?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Not one," she assured him, leaning into his side as his arms circled her waist. "I was just thinking about how unlikely this all is. If someone had told me 10 years ago that we'd end up here, I wouldn't have believed it either," he admitted. "But maybe that's the point. Life rarely follows the path we expect." "Mom, Dad," Henry's voice called from the terrace. "We're ready for the lanterns." They turned to see their son waving excitedly, surrounded by the small gathering of guests holding paper lanterns waiting to be lit. "Coming," Jonathan called back. Before they left the dock, he pulled Megan close for a kiss that held all the promise of their new beginning. "Mrs. Caldwell," he murmured against her lips. "That's going to take some getting used to." She laughed softly. "We have time," he reminded her. "All the time in the world." Hand in hand, they returned to join their son and their guests, to light lanterns that would float like dreams across the dark water, carrying hopes for a future that once seemed impossible. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Harper's Diner became a Chicago institution, its warm atmosphere and excellent food drawing loyal customers and critical acclaim. Megan split her time between the Connecticut estate and the apartment above the diner, finding fulfillment in building something that was truly her own. Jonathan, inspired by Megan's entrepreneurial spirit, gradually shifted his focus from the traditional Caldwell industries to more philanthropic ventures. He established a foundation supporting single parents pursuing higher education, with scholarships named in Megan's honor. Henry thrived, his asthma well managed, his natural intelligence nurtured by both parents in different ways. Jonathan encouraging his interest in science and engineering, Megan fostering his creative side through art and music. By 12, he was designing his own small inventions in the workshop Jonathan had built for him. By 14, he had won his first science competition with a device that monitored air quality to help asthma sufferers. Eleanor Caldwell remained a complex presence in their lives, never fully warming to Megan but developing a genuine bond with Henry, who seemed immune to his grandmother's occasional frostiness. She recognized in him the Caldwell intelligence and determination, traits she valued above all others. "He'll make an excellent CEO someday," she remarked during one of her visits, watching Henry explain his latest project to Jonathan. "If that's what he wants," Megan replied pointedly. Eleanor's lips thinned slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, if that's what he wants." It was a small concession, but a significant one from a woman who had spent her life believing in predetermined paths. On a warm summer evening 5 years after their wedding, Megan and Jonathan sat on the terrace watching the sunset, a comfortable silence between them. Henry was at science camp for 2 weeks, leaving the house unusually quiet. "I had a call from Dr. Winters today," Jonathan said, breaking the silence. "Henry's latest lung function tests show significant improvement. He thinks Henry might outgrow the asthma entirely by his late teens." "That's wonderful news," Megan said, relief evident in her voice. Though Henry's condition had been well controlled for years, she had never stopped worrying during every cold, every change of season. "It got me thinking," Jonathan continued, taking her hand, "about how close we came to missing all of this. If you hadn't answered that ad, if I hadn't come home early that week, if I had told you I was pregnant 10 years ago," Megan added softly. He nodded, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "So many moments where it all could have gone differently. Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" she asked. "If you had known about Henry from the beginning?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd like to think I would have done the right thing," he said finally. "But the truth is, I don't know if I was strong enough then. I was still trying to be the son my father wanted, still measuring success by his standards. And now I measure success differently." He smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "By the happiness of my wife, by the growth of my son, by the life we've built together." Megan leaned against his shoulder, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "It wasn't an easy road." "No," he agreed. "But maybe it needed to be difficult. Maybe we both needed to learn certain lessons before we could truly appreciate what we have." As night fell fully, they moved inside to the library, the room where Henry had first encountered his father, where so many pivotal moments in their journey had unfolded. The space had evolved over the years, Jonathan's austere taste gradually softened by Megan's influence. Family photographs now mingled with the valuable art, Henry's science awards displayed as proudly as the Caldwell heirlooms. "I found something today," Jonathan said, retrieving a small box from his desk drawer. "I was going through some old papers and came across this." Inside lay a small velvet ring box worn with age. Megan's breath caught as she recognized it. The engagement ring Jonathan had bought a decade ago, the one she had glimpsed in his drawer just days before he ended their relationship. "You kept it all this time?" she asked, not touching the box. "I couldn't bring myself to return it," he admitted. "Even after I walked away, it felt like letting go of the last piece of what might have been." Carefully, He opened the box to reveal a diamond solitaire, elegant but modest by Caldwell standards, chosen for Megan's simpler tastes rather than family expectations. "It would have been perfect," she said softly, finally reaching out to touch the ring she had never worn. "It still could be," Jonathan suggested. "Not to replace your wedding band, but perhaps as an anniversary gift? A symbol that we've come full circle?" Megan considered the idea, the symmetry of it appealing. "I'd like that," she decided. "A reminder that sometimes the longest journeys lead us right back where we belong." As Jonathan slipped the ring onto her right hand, a perfect fit, as if the years between had never happened, Megan reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them here. The pain and separation, the struggles and sacrifices, the unexpected reunion that had given them a second chance at the family they were meant to be. "I love you," she said simply, the words holding the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future. "And I love you," he replied, drawing her close. "Always have, always will." Outside, the Connecticut stars shone down on the Caldwell estate, on the home that had once echoed with silence but now resonated with the warmth of a family rebuilt, not from obligation or expectation, but from love that had endured against all odds, growing stronger through the very trials that might have destroyed it. In the end, what began with heartbreak and a secret became something stronger. A family forged through adversity, tempered by time, and bound together not by the rigid legacy of the past, but by the more resilient bonds they had chosen to create. Henry would return from camp in a few days, filling the house once more with his energy and ideas. Eleanor would visit for his birthday next month, bringing expensive gifts and her gradually softening presence. The diner in Chicago would continue to thrive under Megan's careful guidance. Jonathan would balance his business responsibilities with the family life he had come to value above all else. And through it all, Megan and Jonathan would continue to build their unexpected second chance. Day by day, moment by moment, choice by choice, creating a legacy of their own, one founded not on wealth or status or family name, but on the simple, profound truth that sometimes love takes the longest route home. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for healing. Subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us that even the most broken paths can lead to beautiful destinations. Remember, my queens, that life rarely unfolds as we expect. The detours, the heartbreaks, the moments when we think all is lost. These are often the very turns in the road that lead us to our greatest blessings. The courage to begin again, to open our hearts after they've been broken, to trust when trust seems foolish. This is the quiet strength that transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary journeys. Your story isn't finished as long as you're still writing it. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most beautiful chapters come after the pages you thought had ended the book. Until next time, this is Mr. Harrison, reminding you that true love doesn't always arrive on schedule. But when it's real, it's always, always worth the wait.